Okay, so my clock has now hit 2 o'clock Eastern. Appreciate everybody taking the time. We do have a full hour scheduled. I don't know if we have a full hour of material to cover with you today. So please do feel free to drop questions in the chat box, and we can use Nick's time towards the end, and you guys can kind of throw some questions at him and see what he comes back with. What I'd like to do is just take a few seconds while we wait for everybody to get settled and just do a quick introduction to Strongpoint for anybody that's not familiar with us yet. The intent today really isn't to talk about our product very much. It's more to talk about how we test. And this is, like I said already, a very hot topic in the NetSuite space. And we just kind of wanted to share our knowledge with everybody that we could, or at least maybe our experiences and Nick's knowledge. So, inside the NetSuite space, there's a variety of ways that people go about testing. There are some proprietary tools that aren't necessarily commonly used, and then there's a number of free tools available. And I think that's more what we're going to focus on here today, is so just kind of general best practices and principles, and hopefully we can teach you a few things. So for everybody that is brand new to Strongpoint, we are an award-winning application. We do the same things for Salesforce as we do for NetSuite, but we're obviously here to talk about NetSuite today. So we're a managed bundle built for NetSuite, certified, a few hundred customers. And what we do is we automatically create system documentation. And so this is like a complete index of all of the customizations that have been built on the platform. So fields, forms, scripts, workflows, user roles, critical settings and preferences, so on and so forth. We map out all of the dependencies between them and give you great visibility to everything that you have in your system. We then have a full suite of change management tools as well, covering a really broad spectrum of requirements. So impact analysis, change requests and approvals, integration with Jira and ServiceNow, great reporting for visibility to what's changed to help you get through audit, for example. We've got tools to help support deployment and testing as well, so like environment comparison and diff tools between sandbox and production, for example. As well as some more advanced compliance-focused features. And so there, natively within NetSuite, we do segregation of duties, analysis of who has too many roles or permissions, blocking controls to prevent people from getting access to critical roles and permissions, as well as a library of financial controls to help you analyze transactional or record-based events. Again, very audit-focused or compliance-focused. And so always think it's important just to kind of share this to help provide some context for where testing fits in. But like I said, the intent of the webinar today, well, some of what we will cover is our Strongpoint capabilities. The intent is to not be very product focused, but instead to share with you how we test here at Strongpoint, and hopefully you can take something away from that. So for the agenda, I'll introduce Nick Cano. So Nick is our CTO. Nick's been working in the NetSuite ecosystem for a very long time. I won't share dates because it might age him a little bit or date him. But he's been in the NetSuite ecosystem for quite some time, been with Strongpoint for 5, 6, 7 years now. And what he's going to cover for you today is really listed here on this slide, right? Like what types of testing are out there and what are some trends that we're starting to see in 2020? What are some kind of general best practice NetSuite testing methodologies? How does Strongpoint fit in for testing? And some of the things that Nick will share are available for free. So again, this is not intended to be product focused, but we'd love to have you start using our tools even at no cost. Nick will then talk a little bit about what some limits are to automation, and he'll wrap up with scripts and record-based testing strategies. So with that, I will pass it over to Nick. Just as a reminder, you've got a chat box and a question tool. So if you do want to drop any questions in, please feel free to go ahead, and we'll do our best to cover them. So thanks, everybody, and over to you, Nick.
So hi, everybody. It's been a while since I did a webinar, so I'm a little bit rusty. So just be patient with me. The first thing is type of testing that used by NetSuite teams or by any other team. But with NetSuite, we have a particular set of challenges. So we end up doing unit testing, acceptance testing, and regression testing. It will be ideal and magnificent if we can go with the system and integration and all the other cases, all the other type of testing that probably every one of you are familiar with. But in NetSuite, we end up with these three. Why is that? Is because cost effective. We know that our code work at unit level at the beginning, and then we do the acceptance testing on a way that we know that our code in the platform doesn't break anything. In the case of the regression testing, we have 2 NetSuite updates every year, so we retest all. And also every time that we push a new change in our product, we also test that particular piece. And that's when the things start getting a little bit more complex. Because testing at the end is very easy. Like, we have been doing testing since the very beginning of the software development. Like, it's just a matter to repeat, or start thinking to don't repeat too many things. But there are some problems. Like, first of all, scope. Every project right now is complex enough that at some point I don't know what to test. I don't know if I'm testing everything that I will be need to be tested, or I am over testing, missing something, or even worse, I'm testing things incorrectly because I'm focusing only in one area, and then I should be focusing in another one. An example of that, to don't talk too much theoretical, is I'm going to test a particular script. Let's say a Sweetlet that seems to be completely nothing, say, with anything else, but somehow that Sweetlet trigger a workflow, and that workflow triggers something else. So I end up executing a lot of stuff that give me unexpected behavior of probably my small little Sweetlet that was only to acknowledge the PO receivement. That's it. So the what to test in NetSuite sometimes is a little bit difficult because we are not only deal with our code, we also deal with a platform, and we also deal with code from people that are not longer in the company, is not even with our company at any point, or it's already have 10 or 15 years on that account. So the what to test in NetSuite is quite complex. It's not the only platform in the world. Myself, and this is going to put a date in your mind also, I came from AS400 and those IBM mainframes, and we have the same difficulties at the time. So this is not new. The way that we are trying to solve this is the interesting part. The other part in NetSuite, and right now that the solutions are more and more complex and more distributed, and I don't even want to start talking about people like us that distribute products to multiple environments, 300, 400. So which environments I should be testing? Like, in which stage? I should be testing just dev, UAT, my sandbox number 3, production, whatever. So I need to understand the scope, and the scope right now also include environments. I'm part of a multiple company effort to deliver to the customer, so I'm probably want to test my own environments and then push into some integration environment that have code of other people or has configuration. So I need to have that visibility. And also, I need to be sure that I'm testing the right version. This seems obvious, but it has been happening to all of us. Like, we have been testing in UIT without knowing that someone pushed a new version, or the deployment that's supposed to happen on Friday didn't happen. So somehow we need to validate that we are testing everything that we need and just what we need, so we don't have a scope creep. We are testing the correct environments, and we are testing the right version. So these are the big 3 problems. that of course can be divided to the infinite of some, like, okay, the version is exactly the same that I have in the repository, so my release is exactly the same that the one that the customer will have access after. Like, all that questions end up in bullet 3. What to test? Sometimes other dev managers or even developers says, we will test everything again. So we are going to test all the sales process again. And that's, I cannot say it's a waste of time, but at least it's not efficient. So based on these 3 big problems, we have a way to think about testing. And our way to think about testing, there is a lot of letter there that you can read this, but basically it's streamline the testing process and allow quick access to data analysis, which sounds great, but at the end is everything that we do it with some data. Like, we try to reduce the hero approach of like, okay, this needs to be on Monday, so every developer that is not coding is testing, or I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to test everything again, and I don't know if the script actually fails because my interaction or because it's something else. So we need data. Like, our focus is testing with data. And when we say streamline the testing processes, prevent testing process to be climbing Mount Everest. Like, okay, yeah, I understand. We spend like 2 months in coding, doing certain level of testing. We know that kind of work. And then we get our QA team to says, hey, you know what? Now you need to test everything. And that sounds great up to a certain level, that the QA team will be completely focused on something that it's already developed, and the back and forward there is impossible to manage. And for smaller firms, mean that my developers are focusing QA, or I'm or I'm doing pair coding. So some developer is testing other work from another developer. So it tends to be a mess. So instead to be a moment in the time, we try to be a streamlined process that is always present. Like, we are always testing, we are always ensuring quality, and we always do it with data that support that process. Beautiful words, but let's see how we are doing. There are a couple of trends that we adopt. In this case, I put it 2020, but some of them are with us for a long, long time. Shift left testing, QA ops, and Spider in AI. I'm going to just make a brief comment about the Spider in AI. The idea is to separate the documentation and to separate the fact that I'm tracking version, I'm tracking where each version is deployed, I'm tracking the different branches, I'm tracking the different repositories from the QA team. So make it in a way that is automatically, it has some artificial intelligence there. So we know what to test, we know what should be testing together, because that's another important point. Like, when you do the acceptance testing, in our case, we don't do integration testing by the book, we do more acceptance test. We know that we need certain scripts to be tested together, or we know that we need to test certain process together. So that Spider in AI that is kind of getting more and more and more traction is something that, at least for myself, it sounds like, yeah, we have been doing this for ages, because actually Strongpoint, what it does is keep the documentation up to date in my account and different environments, and allow me to compare, and allow me to do everything completely separate, so from the QA team or from the dev team. So I don't need anything else. I don't have the artificial intelligence per se in the way that it detects what I need, but I have enough intelligence to be an expert system that tells me all the dependencies and give me all the coverage of what I need to test. So spidering is something that is already embedded in Strongpoint. If we go into QA ops or shift left, great idea. At the end is get your QA team involved from the very beginning. Get your QA team involved in all the stages. Like, don't left them in a silo. Like, don't left them in a locked room till we need them. Like, get them involved. Let put their feedback into our different stages. Like, when we requirement gathering, get testing involved. Okay, you understand the requirement. How do you think that you are going to be able to test it? How we can prove that this works at design? In development, need to be a back and forward. And in deployment, of course, it's more like natural to have testing in the deployment stage. But the big switch between what they call shift left is testing drives a lot of feedback back to our development activities, and testing end up driving a lot of activities instead of from the business to the stakeholder to the developer, and then the tester is someone that is just there sitting waiting to a spreadsheet to just appear and open a browser and click. So this is the way that we do it. I know that for small teams, and I was one of that, my first reaction is, it's incredibly obvious because I'm the guy that do the requirement gathering, I'm the guy that do design, I'm the guy that do development, I'm the guy that do deployment, and also I do testing everywhere. So I was doing shift left testing since the very beginning before anybody know it, or anybody tell me. So, but it's good to formalize, and it's good to have it as a company in your mindset, involve testing all over. In the case of QA ops, we get a little bit more technical. It's also include through all the activities, what is called parallel testing. But we start thinking about make it a couple of things more automatic. We think about the scalability. And what is test scalability? Because usually we love to have like 10,000 people testing our system, so nothing happened and our code will be bug free. There is no software in the world that is bug free. And at least we understand test scalability as the ability to produce better result with the same people, with the more automatic tools, and being able to run everything faster and more repetitive, and being able to do more test cases in the same period of time. So that's what we understand with test scalability. Also, we can talk about a little bit about that the scalability can make test a little bit more complex. Ensure that we are testing everything, or we are testing edge cases, or we are adding more intelligence in our test. So try to reproduce as much as possible on how the user are going to end up using our tools. Integrating dev and IT ops in QA is kind of like obvious because the shift to left approach, worth to mention. So available testing tools. We now we don't live in a cave. We know there are several tools out there, even a couple that are NetSuite integrated, that are pay, free, whatever. But we decide for us that for us, this combination is good enough. Flashlight by Strongpoint is our free product. So even if you are a small shop that you don't need all the compliance and segregation of duties and change management, but you need really good documentation and really good dependencies and everything, you can just use Flashlight. to get that information that is so important to understand what to test in which environment and which version. Of course, as being Strongpoint, we have a Strongpoint enterprise with all the possible models available for us, and we use it. We use Selenium. It's free, it's fine. There is a lot of capabilities. There are other tools. The goal there is to have a tool that can repetitively do actions at browser level, simulate a user interaction. I personally like Selenium, the fact that I can play a little bit with the macros, and I will show you later, but keep with this idea. I store the macro as a test, as text, and that macro end up to be a test record in a Strongpoint. So I have version control, I have change management, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm also ensuring that I have the right macros for the right moment to test. And also, we use NetSuite, the platform itself, as our testing tool. How that's possible? Basically, we create custom records. We create a set of scripts that execute and other scripts and tell us the execution. I will dig into later, but that's part of going back to shift left. We develop the scripts in a way that can be tested by our own testing script. So I think that's a good approach. I will say great, but that's too pompous. So it's a good approach because we know that all the scripts that we create, we have a way to test it. We have a clear input, a clear output, and those can be executed by other scripts that we develop inside the NetSuite to test by themselves. So to put you in context, we use Strongpoint or Flashlight to determine scope, testing coverage, store all the documentation about the testing. We use Selenium to reproduce the user interaction with our product from the browser and try to simulate. And we use NetSuite itself to run as automatic as possible. A lot of testing that are unit testing and a little bit more, because some script we test the script plus a cascade of other scripts. So let's go to coverage. Strongpoint. For the ones that are not familiar and for the ones that are familiar, we have the ability to define the scope. In this case, I add the customizations that I want to test or the customization that I just made. And then Strongpoint will tell me if they can be safely deleted or modified, meaning that there is no dependencies. So I know that I can test the get customer node Suitelet script by themselves, and it's not going to have any impact. But for the other ones, I have some dependencies. In this case, it tells me that PO approval was recently used. Why this is important is because I'm going to mess around with something that is in permanent use, so I need to be a little bit more careful. And in the last one, that is a very interesting one, it tells me that it have a dependent form and a dependent form flow workflow. So if I'm going to do a change and then I'm going to test this workflow, probably I want to test the other customization. I want to test the other workflows, ensure that the other forms works. And this already gives me more visibility than the one that I have just by looking at the workflow. I can have this information without a Strongpoint. Yes, if you are smart enough and knowledgeable enough in NetSuite, definitely yes. But we are talking right now about 3 customizations that you can do it manually and maybe get it right. With the Strongpoint, you have the ability to get all your account fully documented, and in this case, define the scope and the coverage as efficient as possible and with almost no error in the dependencies that we get. And says almost no error because nothing is perfect. Maybe some car or some movie from the 40s is perfect, but beside that, nothing more. So other thing that give me Strongpoint, it give me a very good visual way to understand what my code is touching and what I need to pay attention to and what I want to include or not in my testing. In this case, I can easily take a look and says, yeah, PO approval, great, is a workflow, but the only relationship that I have is with fields. So I'm not going to really include any script. I'm going to just verify that the fields after the PO approval end up in the state that I want. In this case, which is the one that is a little bit more complex, I have forms and I have workflow. So probably I want to include the other workflow for sure, and some of the forms to ensure that nothing gets broke there, and being able to submit the same record. So very simple, with a few clicks, using a Strongpoint, I'm getting an idea of my test scope, the effort involved, what I'm going to be testing, and also the reliability that I know what I'm testing. Like nothing is missing. I'm not over testing, but also I'm not under testing. So browser-based testing. In this case, we use Selenium. Selenium is free. I don't know how familiar you are, but it's one of the tools that is more available to everybody. What we do with Selenium is use the Chrome add-on to just record the interactions that we do a particular part of our system, open a form, put some field values, click a couple of buttons, save, delete, all the kind of things. Selenium allows us to then replicate that multiple times. So part of our testing strategy is for certain pieces of our software, we had a macro that will do 20, 50, 100 interactions with the browser automatically in Selenium, and then track what actually happened. So that gives us confidence that everything is working as expected and nothing gets broke. And we try to reproduce the human behavior as much as possible. Then what I like of just Selenium is the fact that I have the macro itself stored as a text. We add this in our test record. We add this as another asset. So we include this into change management with the Strongpoint itself. And we also run some reports before start testing to ensure that nobody mess around with the macros, and we are running the correct macros from the customization. Because now I'm going to show you a little bit more. There is a way that you can relate a particular test record with a customization. So that test record contains not only the description of the test case in writing, also we add the test macro. So we know exactly what we are testing, and we know exactly what we are doing with Selenium. Okay, the last part on how we test is script and record-based testing. I was talking about this all over the presentation for now. What this actually means. Okay, first of all, in Strongpoint, we have the test records. The test records is just a way that we have to store information, to name a particular test, to assign an owner, to determine the test type, put a lot of information about the input field and the expected outcome, assign process owner or not, data set, maybe the data set also is a spreadsheet, or maybe the data set is a safe search. So we document everything here. And we also relate this test record to the customization. So we go to the test record and we get more and more information about it. I didn't pick one with the customization, but we relate the test record with the customization, with the environment that's supposed to be testing, the account ID, and we have everything in one place. And then beside the script node, we are going to have the data input, the input fields, and all the macro and some test nodes. So one place of all the tests that we should be running connected to the customizations, and being able to report and being able to link it back to Strongpoint documentation. And this is the fun part. I was mentioned that we create our own scripts. We create a set of scripts that execute other scripts based on the test records, based on the data input, the data field, the expected outcome, even some macro and some other things that I will not mention if someone doesn't get a Macallan's bottle for me. We end up creating a small tool that runs those scripts for us and give us the status of failing, pass, and keep track of that. In this case, we have an owner, the date creation, what is the name of the script, the file involved, the type of script, if it's a schedule or not, because we are able to run this on a schedule basis, and who is the owner and the API version, and then the different executions and what was the result. This tool is internal. It's not for us. It's not to be distributed, but what we want to show is the capabilities is there. It's not ideal. It's not going to run everything that you may want, and it's not going to help anybody if you don't go back to the shift left and get the QA ops right and make everything on the dev process, be aware of testing, and even when you develop the script, think about, okay, this is going to be tested in an automatic way based on our test record, and we are going to run it in a different way. So, but at least there is something there that allow us to, in an automatic way, ensure that our script at least have the input and output. So the combination of Selenium plus the ability that we have to run scripts automatically and to determine if they fail and pass, give us a lot of good testing performance and a great ability to scale this. Now, another view of what we're doing, like we get the testing output, so it's kind of homemade, but it gives us a lot of information. I know that there are other companies around that use that use different tools to do the same. For us, it was better to construct internally and have it run it with our scripts than get any other test solution that is around. But the key here is you think about testing at the very beginning when you are talking about the requirements. At that point, you start thinking, okay, how I'm going to test this is more on a mathematical way. Like, okay, I'm thinking about this particular problem, how I'm going to prove that I'm right. So it's the same approach. If you're going to resolve something, okay, let's resolve it, but let's find a way to know that I'm right with that solution. And this is how we tackle testing. To finish
Awesome.
this, sorry?
No, that was me saying thank you because I knew you were getting to your last slide, but go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to my last slide. Speed and safety automation is key. We already automate with the Strongpoint a lot of stuff. In this case, we automate partially the testing for us. So that's pretty much it. But the key here is we already have a tool in a Strongpoint, in the different version of Flashlight or different scale that allow us to do a lot of this. Like, it's not because we develop a Strongpoint, we know the in and outs. That's why we can use it for testing now. It's just a matter to put the right process, think about testing as how I prove that I'm right, how I prove that this actually works, and use a Strongpoint for the heavy lifting in define scope, keep everything up to date, have the right versions, enough documentation to understand what is going on, and then develop the scripts in a way that can be tested by other scripts and can be self-contained, and everything can be related to the very first conversation with the business owner to the last line in your script. And that's it. So Paul, all yours from now on.
Great, thank you. So I hope everybody found that valuable. Like I said at the starting, I think that the intent here was really to give a broad overview of testing in NetSuite, to share with you some trends, and to discuss a little bit about the tools that are available out there to you. And the way that we did that was by talking about how we test here at Strongpoint. And so we've still got some time. There is a QA function inside the Zoom meeting. And whether it's something that was directly covered or something else that you think we might have an answer for on the spot, please feel free to drop something in there. We're happy to stay and chat with you for a little bit here. So I'm going to start answering the ones as they come in. And so the first one, which I think is also very important, is will the recording be shared? So yes, the recording is going to be shared. And then what we typically do with our webinars is also provide either a one-page summary or a 4 or 5 page summary of the topics that we discussed. And so you'll be getting kind of a short little bullet point format one pager that summarizes some of the things that we talked about, just about general best practices and principles. And then, we'll see based on kind of the questions of whether we also turn this into a longer one. A couple of weeks ago, we did something similar for user roles and permissions, and we created a 5-page ebook out of it because there was a ton of questions. So I'll start reading through, and Nick, I'll read the questions. You can answer them.
Yeah, okay.
Would testing functions be integrated with Strongpoint, or do we have to use third-party tools as we do now, for example, Selenium?
Right now it's not integrated, but you will find there is a way that the function can be triggered from inside NetSuite. So at the end you can trigger from Strongpoint. I think in the near future we will end up doing some test integration with what we already developed internally. It's kind of my pet project. And I always do the same joke about if the pet project for Lamborghini at some point was the Miura. I am into cars, of course. I hope that this end up as good looking as the Miura. But beside that, there is no already defined integration, but it's easy for you to put the link in the test record to execute from there. And as I mentioned, you put all the macro information in the test record. So in a manual way, you get from the customization to the different dependencies to the test record and to run that particular execution of the test record.
Yeah. One of the other questions here, Nick, is can you review the macro tool again? Just to clarify, the macro tool is not a part of Strongpoint directly, but they're asking how that calls your Selenium IDE scripts.
Review the macro tool. So this is Selenium, basically. What you do is, I don't have here the particular screenshot, but you review the macro. You, at the end, it generates something like this, similar more or less. And then what you do in Selenium is to open this file and says execute this. So you end up in a page similar to this, but instead to start the recording and then play, you click File, Open, select the particular macro, and goes into. So right now, what we do is we have a link that end up in the page that we want to test, and then we just copy and paste, or we have another link that copy automatically for us into Selenium the macro that we want to test. I don't know if that answered the question. But
you can let us know. And then we can kind of go from there. So we've got another one here. You know, do you have recommendations on how we can test an end-to-end flow, starting from, say, procurement to order to cash to reports? So how would you recommend tackling testing a large process like that? And actually, this is, I'll do a little plug while Nick thinks about it, but one of our next webinar topics, I think, is going to be process mapping in NetSuite. And so maybe that's almost a question that can hint towards the next one. But Nick, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, the thing is, every complex process in the world can be divided in a set of input and output. So I didn't get the process that you were asking in detail, but let's go with someone that I'm very familiar. Let's test something that starts from the web store, end up in a sales order. That's an item fulfillment. The item fulfillment then generate an RMA for some reason, generate a bill, generate a payment, and then an approval. So the way that I need to test is to understand first which customization affect that particular process. In my case, I go back to Strongpoint and start looking at all the customization that are deployed to the sales order record, the item fulfillment record, the customer invoice, the payment, the RMA, and the items. As soon as I understand that, I know the scripts, or I know the automatic process, because Strongpoint is not only about script. I will get the forms, I will get the workflow. The next step, you will be thinking, okay, what are my inputs and what are my outputs in each one of that particular scenarios? So for example, in the web store, my first input will be my shopping cart. So I need to simulate somehow my shopping cart. In that case, I'm going into Selenium. I will generate a macro that put the most complex possible scenario of items in that cart and submit that. How can be complex? It can be, I don't know, items with quantity, items in dropship, items in special orders, and so on. I create that macro to submit 10,000 million sales orders if I want. And I've been able to change different location, different shipping address, billing, different payments, every possible combination. So I will have multiple sales orders. So the next step will be test the scripts there. I can do it as simple as another macro that goes to the sales order and fulfill. So get all the sales orders that entered today. So I create a safe search for today, and then I go in, click one by one and fulfill. That's going to be accomplished by Selenium. And then I expect to get all the fulfillments correctly be done. The ones that are not done are going to be recorded, and then I have a problem there. In parallel, I need to test the scripts on everything that is automatic. And that's why I will be extremely happy if the guys that develop the script make it as modular or as object-based or class-based, that everything have a clear input and output again. So if that happens, what I'm going to do is to create my own script that runs those with a subset of data that I manually create. That subset of data can be also part of the data input in my test record. So I know for the next time that I'm going to execute, for example, a schedule script that receive a JSON, and that schedule script start executing user events, or start calling sweetlets, or start creating a dummy record that trigger a workflow. And then the same schedule script will run a safe search that will tell me if the execution of all of that end up with the expected results. So my recommendation is divided in input and output. Have two lines of testing. One is simulate users, that's Selenium, and the other one is simulate that you're running that script in isolation, but with another script that get executed. I don't know if that's enough, but anything else?
Yes, we have a few more here. And so I might bucket a few different questions. So there's one that says, a lot of auditors tend to go by the books when it comes to expectations of ticketing, approvals, testing, and sign off after the implementation into production. In your experience, how can Strongpoint be used to show evidence of this and manage to satisfy the auditor's requests, all while remaining as efficient as possible in execution of the task? Testing and documentation take a lot of time and doesn't scale down when you have a small team who are often the testers, the admins, and the implementers themselves. And then there's a few other questions down below that focus in specifically on FDA compliance, specifically in the life sciences and biotech industry. So we'll kind of lump a bunch of these questions into one big answer. So I think in a lot of ways that kind of describes some of the challenges that Strongpoint sets out to meet. Automatically documenting all changes to a system, automatically creating very specific change logs for all of the changes that happen, and then helping our customers get away from having to do saved search built reviews of system notes. And instead we compile our change logs and audit logs into a more unique format where you can really kind of slice and dice and parse through the data in a number of different ways. So we track the documentation, we track all of the changes and the reporting that take place. And then there's a few ways that you can kind of prove that certain steps have taken place. So for example, we have an environment comparison tool where you can run a diff between environments before deployment and after deployment to prove that the two environments are now identical. And then a few ways, like Nick even mentioned briefly today, of kind of attaching proof of testing that was done. And so for life sciences and biotech specifically, you're looking to prove that you're operating in an environment where the processes are or have been validated. And so there's a variety of ways that you can set up kind of custom searches of our change logs and run environment comparisons to validate that that in fact is the case. And again, Nick kind of showed out how you can really kind of set up scope for testing by using our tools and ensuring that you understand dependencies. But I think our tool really does help meet those audit requirements by having all of the data inside the system for you. Nick, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, one important point is if you get the Strongpoint, for example, installed in your dev account, you are going to be able to prove that no change to the scripts are done without an approval. And this is when you are going to get the auditor sign off also every time that you execute that particular script and that the script generate a change on something else, you are going to have a change log that demonstrate that a particular script get executed, a change occurs, and that change was approval, and that change was review, and you document everything. And then at the end for the auditor is just get a couple of Strongpoint reports that shows that you not only approve all the changes, you also run all the scripts, the script generate the data that's supposed to be generated, you review it accordingly, and you have full documentation of everything that you are going to deploy in the customer account or everything that you are deploying internally with the Strongpoint itself. So at the end, everything that the auditors needed is generated automatically. The key here is to make the scripts that you are creating generate enough evidence, in this case, generating records or updating records, or just by the system notes that Strongpoint also capture, or with agent, you can capture the execution of particular scripts. So you get all automatically. That's part of the getting QA ops in an automatic way and run several activities in parallel. So it's not just, okay, I'm going to test now and then I'm going to document and I open the spreadsheet. As any activity that you are doing on the systems, it's going to left a trace in a Strongpoint, and that's going to be able to be reported back to the auditor. So at the end, you have the full package to present.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So another question here is Strongpoint available in NetSuite release preview environment? And so the answer to that question is yes. If you have Strongpoint installed in your production environment, it'll also be available in release preview. Our environment comparison tool is the most commonly used for that example, is using it to compare between release preview and production. But there definitely is a methodology that we have that we can share and recommend to you there. If you just go and compare the two, you might be overwhelmed with data. But again, really, I think the purpose there is, like Nick mentioned earlier, is just, understanding what needs to be tested, what's different, and that can really help guide your efforts and then save you some time. But yeah, absolutely is available in release preview.
Yeah, and also following on the release preview, the typical scenario is the testing twice a year. So if, I don't know, if in September you define all your test records, you will going to be able to reuse all of that for the next release. So you only need to think about what changed between one day to another to include it, and the rest is already there. Whatever tool you select, if you select Selenium, you will have the macros there, and it will run again. And that's scalability.
Great, thank you. So one question here is that, are there tests that you choose to do manually rather than being automated? If so, what type of test deserves to be done manually rather than through automation?
The short question is, depend of the tool that you are building, because manual testing always going to exist, especially if there is some real world impact. The way that I choose to do something manual or automatic is the impact that it have in the business. In the case of developing a Strongpoint, 99% is doing automatically. The only ones that get a manual review are the ones that are going to have an impact on the reports that get presented to the auditors, because that meaning that it can have a very negative impact in my customer's finance if I get it wrong. So the way that at least we see it is depend of, one, the impact in the business, and second, the complexity. If we are talking about an implementation of a marketplace with 5 different SCA websites, single sign-on there that connect with everything, and then a procurement system and SPS commerce pushing some data, maybe some of that end up require some manual testing up to the point that I understand the process good enough and the input and outputs that I can make it automatically. So you can make everything manual, or you can make only the one that are life risking situation or finance risking situations. That's my point. And guys, testing is a continuous evolution. It's not like, yeah, I'm going to be fully automatic tomorrow. There's no way. So you probably start with some pieces in automatic way, some pieces that are you moving into automatic after you understand the proper process and the proper connections and the proper data flow, and then you're gonna start moving more and more pieces in automatic.
Thank you. So, there are definitely some other questions here. I know that we haven't really answered all of them yet. And so I did try to respond to a few of them directly, and we can take them offline. Just for some more specific examples, we're happy to dedicate some time to them. Last thing I guess I'll ask quickly is, Nick, do you have any recommendations for automation frameworks? Any other way to do this that hasn't been covered?
There is a couple of frameworks that are Node.js based, but those are great if you just develop a script-based solution. So I don't recall the name, and honestly, it's not that I don't want to say it, it's I don't recall the name, I'm completely blind, but there are not too much things around when you need to start playing with some of the declarative objects, being forms and workflows. So I will be recommended to keep it on these ones. And then if you have a massive SCA or a massive code intensive solution, you may check other frameworks that are in GitHub for for JavaScript testing and just get a Node.js server running locally. So at least you can ensure that all your scripts running and all your script runs are playing nice to each other. But at the end, you are going to move them into NetSuite, and you're going to end up using Selenium or some other script in NetSuite to run them all. So there are not too much things around.
Okay. So looks like the flow of questions has stopped. So appreciate everybody's time. As a reminder, we will be sending out a copy of the recording and a short little summary of some of the topics that we covered. You know, if there's anything else you want to learn about, we do have on our website under the resources section some older webinars. I did mention that we had our roles and permissions and access controls a couple weeks ago. That was a really big hit. We have an ebook for that as well that you can download. It's about a detailed 5 or 6 or 7 page overview. Under the use cases tab for NetSuite, we also have a number of little short posts. Blog section has a couple recent videos that we put together around monitoring administrator transactions and things like that. And so happy to kind of continue going here, and we'll hopefully be back in touch soon. Please feel free to reach out, and we can set up a call from there. So thanks for your time, everybody. Appreciate it, and we'll be back in touch soon.
Thank you, guys.